Hello there. In this video I'll show how to unpivot an Excel table with VBA. We're going to take data which looks like this and turn it into data that looks like this, where our values now go down rows instead of across columns. I'm using Microsoft Office 365 on PC Desktop Excel. If you're familiar with what unpivoting data is, you've probably heard of Power Query. Power Query is most likely the best method for unpivoting your data, and it's super fast. So why am I taking the time to show a VBA method for this? Because a lot of people still use VBA. That and someone said it couldn't be done quickly, so challenge accepted. Now I've done this dozens of times, usually with some throwaway code, and it takes about 10-15 minutes to write up. This particular example, however, took me about an hour to write because I'm videotaping it and I want it to look good, and more importantly, I made the code generic with a few parameters so I'll be able to reuse the code later. Before we get into the code, let me explain what's going to happen here. I'm going to take each row, and for each row, I'm going to take each value in these month columns and make one new row out of it. So one row will contain one unique record. So it's more of a normalized data source as compared to this pivoted data. Typically it's better to have normalized data if you want to run any kind of reporting or aggregation on it. By no means is this example meant to replace Power Query. Power Query is an amazing tool. In fact, the results of the code look identical to what you can get out of Power Query. The final result will look something like this, where we have the first three static columns and then our unpivoted columns. I did the same thing in Power Query and the results look identical. So what the code actually does is there's two loops. The outermost loop loops through each row. The inner loop within the row loop loops through every column in that row. I've specified the start column. There's also a few assumptions here in that my unpivoted columns are the rightmost columns of my data set, and there's no other data to the right of that. So these are the last 12 columns. Now I actually do use a third loop to loop through these first three columns, and I'll show you why in just a moment. For now, let's jump into the code. Here's my main routine. Here's the unpivot routine, which I do a little setting up, a little validation. I put the data on a new worksheet so I don't mess with any of the old data. I pass a few parameters to the routine in which I specify the table object that is the source, the target cell, which is the top left cell of the destination I want the data to go to, the first column number, which is the leftmost column of the columns I want to unpivot. The other assumption with this parameter is that every column from this index column to the right are all columns I'm going to unpivot, and that there is no other data beyond that to the right. This optional parameter will just give me an extra index column to index my values by column number, starting with the leftmost column I want to unpivot. In this case, it's the fourth column, so columns 4 through 15 will be numbered 1 through 12. Looking at the actual routine, I try to touch the range as little as possible, so I'm using arrays to store the value from the source table. I then size my new array depending on whether I'm adding this extra column or not. And the last time I need to touch the range object is to go through the headers and grab the values. I do this because one of the columns should be the column headers that we're unpivoting, so that data will go down rows. The next part is fairly straightforward. It's just our two loops. Loop through the rows, then we loop through the columns. I add my row count for my new data structure, and here's that other loop I told you about. This one is only needed for those first 1 to n static columns. And since I used a parameter to tell which column to start with, I don't know beforehand how many columns will be static, but I assume it's always from column 1 through column n, which is one less than the first column specified. So that's what this third inner loop does. It grabs those first static columns, and then I use two lines to just add my values, and what the attribute is, the attribute will be the column header values that are now going down columns. Now that I have my data set the way I want, I have to put it to the destination. I start with putting the column headers where they need to be. Since in this routine I don't know beforehand how many static columns I'm going to have, I use a loop to set those header values. After my headers are set, I'll set the actual values. I used two variables here because all of my values did not have a header associated with it, so I need to put that in one. I used the other variable which included the header range because I wanted to make a table out of it. The table style will mimic whatever the source table style is. The name will be whatever the name of the source table is, plus an appended underscore unpivoted. There is no error handling in this. There is no check to see if the table name exists. There is no check to see if the destination range is clear. The closest thing we have to error handling is when we look at the source table of whether the table headers are showing or not. We will grab the header row range value, or if it's not showing, this would error out, so we just loop through the columns and grab the name from the list column. Other than that, there's basically no error handling in this. So let's run it and see what happens. Alright, here we go. And it works. Now, since most of you would use Power Query for this, I'll show you how to do that as well. From the source table, on the data tab, just say you have data from table. Then I'm just going to select the leftmost column, scroll over to the right, hold the Shift key, click my last column. Now you can either right-click one of the column headers and select Unpivot Columns, or in the Transform tab, there's an Unpivot Columns menu item here, and I want to unpivot these columns. Here I have my first three static columns, plus my value columns. So I'm just going to close and load this to a connection. As you can see, I had already written this once before. We've gone over how to unpivot an Excel table with VBA and how to duplicate it in Power Query. There's a lot of great resources on the internet for doing this. I'll put a few helpful links in the description below. If there's anything you'd like to see done in Excel, please let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. If this helped, let me know by clicking that like button.